Beneath the merciless Texas sun, where shadows offer the only reprieve from blistering heat, 5 newborn Mustangs lay abandoned, their delicate bodies marked with strange symbols, their fate sealed by those who deem them unworthy of life. What makes a spirit untamable? What force inside the wildest of creatures refuses to bend even when bred for generations to submit? Sometimes the things we try hardest to eliminate are precisely what we need most to survive. Sometimes what appears broken becomes the very thing that heals us. When Michael Connor, a wounded veteran, haunted by the ghosts of war, discovers these 5 dying foals on the edge of his inherited ranch, something deeper than pity stirs within him. These aren't simply discarded animals. They are survivors like himself, rejected by a world that values perfection over resilience. But neither he nor the foals realize that this chance encounter will expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest echelons of power, a calculated attempt to control what should never be owned. This is their story, a testament to how saving another's life can ultimately save your own. The merciless Texas sun beat down on Lone Canyon, baking the earth until it cracked like shattered pottery. Heat shimmered above the parched ground, distorting the horizon in waves that resembled water, a cruel mirage in a landscape desperate for rain. Summer had arrived with a vengeance, turning the once vibrant rangeland into a tableau of dusty browns and faded yellows. Michael Connor wiped sweat from his brow, with a forearm already caked in dirt. The fence post he'd been struggling with for the past hour refused to remain upright in the dry soil. Like everything else on the dilapidated ranch he'd inherited, it seemed determined to collapse. Just like the rest of this place, he muttered to himself, a habit he'd developed during long patrols in Afghanistan. Nothing wants to stay standing. The sun glinted off the metal of his prosthetic brace, a not-so-subtle reminder of what the war had cost him. His right leg, damaged by an IED, now functioned with the help of a custom brace that enabled him to walk, but left him with a persistent limp and chronic pain. The physical wounds, however, paled in comparison to the ones that couldn't be seen. 3 months had passed since his father's funeral, a somber affair with few attendees reflecting the solitary life James Connor had chosen after his wife's death decades earlier. Michael had returned to a property he barely recognized, with only vague childhood memories to guide him through the sprawling ranch that had once been one of the finest in the county. Now it was a shadow of its former glory. Fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, weeds had overtaken what used to be grazing pastures. The house itself seemed to be slowly sinking into the earth, its paint peeling like sunburned skin. Michael had no intention of staying. His plan was simple: make the minimum necessary repairs, put the property on the market, and return to the aimless existence he'd been living since his medical discharge. He'd moved through a series of temporary homes and rented rooms, never settling, never connecting. The ranch represented nothing but a burden, one more responsibility he hadn't asked for and didn't want. He hammered the fence post with unnecessary force, finding a bitter satisfaction in the physical exertion. Each strike drove the wood deeper into the resistant earth and momentarily silenced the memories that haunted him. The explosion, the screams of his unit, the faces of those he couldn't save. The distant sound of an engine caught his attention. A battered blue pickup was approaching along the dirt road that led to the property, trailing dust behind it like a comet's tail. Michael straightened, wincing at the stiffness in his back. Visitors were rare out here, where the nearest neighbor was miles away. The truck came to a stop, and an elderly Native American man emerged, moving with the measured grace of someone who had seen many seasons come and go. His weathered face was lined with deep creases, and his silver hair hung in a single long braid down his back. "Frank," Michael acknowledged with a nod. Frank Yellowhawk had been his father's closest friend, though Michael himself barely knew the man beyond brief childhood encounters in the funeral 3 months prior. "Your fence giving you trouble?" Frank asked, his eyes taking in the scene with quiet assessment. "Everything here is giving me trouble," Michael replied, driving the hammer into the ground and wiping his hands on his jeans. "Did you need something?" Frank shook his head slightly. "Saw you working as I was passing. Thought I'd check in. Your father would have—" "My father isn't here." Michael cut him off, the familiar tension whenever James Connor was mentioned tightening his shoulders. "And I'm only here temporarily." Frank didn't react to the abruptness, his expression remaining placid. "Still planning to sell then? As soon as I can make this place look like less of a disaster." Michael gestured toward the expanse of the ranch. No one wants to buy a property that's falling apart. The older man nodded, his gaze drifting to the distant horizon where the land met the vast Texas sky. This was good land once, still is underneath. Just needs the right kind of care. Something in his tone made Michael glance at him sharply. I'm not the right kind of care, Frank. I'm not a rancher. Never wanted to be. Hmm, was all Frank said, a sound neither agreement nor disagreement. The conversation might have ended there, another brief, uncomfortable exchange in the string of interactions Michael had endured since returning to Lone Canyon. But a sudden sound carried on the hot breeze so faint it might have been imagination. Both men froze listening. There it came again, a weak, tremulous cry that seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond the broken fence line. You hear that? Michael asked, already moving toward the sound, his ingrained medical training responding before conscious thought. Frank followed his steps, deliberate but swift for a man his age. Sounds like an animal in distress. They crossed the fence line onto public land that bordered the ranch, a rugged expanse of scrub land that eventually gave way to the foothills of distant mountains. The cry came again, leading them toward a shallow ravine where the land dipped between rocky outcroppings. The first thing Michael saw was a flash of silver in the shadow of a mesquite tree. As they drew closer, the outline became clear. A small foal, its coat a dusty gray, lay on its side in the sparse shade. But it wasn't alone. 4 other foals huddled nearby, their tiny bodies showing the prominent ribs of severe malnutrition. Jesus, Michael breathed, dropping to his knees beside them. His combat medic instincts kicked in as he quickly assessed their condition. They're Mustang foals. Can't be more than a few days old. Severely dehydrated, Ed. No sign of the mares, Frank observed, scanning the surrounding area. They've been abandoned. The silver-gray foal raised its head weakly as Michael approached, regarding him with eyes that held surprising intelligence for such a young animal. Despite its condition, there was a defiance in its gaze that stirred something in Michael. They won't last another hour in this heat, he said, already shrugging off his shirt to create some shade for the weakest foal, a dun-colored colt, that barely moved except for the shallow rise and fall of its sides. As he tended to them, Michael noticed something unusual. Each foal bore a small mark on its flank, a series of numbers and letters that appeared to be tattooed into their skin. RC X0571, RC X0572, and so on. These aren't wild markings, he said, pointing them out to Frank. Someone's tagged them. Frank knelt beside the silver foal, examining the marking with narrowed eyes. RC Ravencrest, the equestrian center that opened about 50 miles from here a few years back. Why would their foals be out here dying? Michael asked, anger beginning to simmer beneath his concern. These animals hadn't wandered here by accident. They'd been left deliberately abandoned to die alone in the scorching heat. That, Frank said gravely, is a question worth asking. Michael's mind raced. The nearest veterinarian was in town at least 30 minutes away. His truck was back at the fence line. The foals needed immediate help if they were to survive. I'm taking them back to the ranch, he decided, already fashioning a makeshift sling from his shirt. Can you help me carry them? Frank nodded, his expression somber. These little ones are fighters to have lasted this long. They deserve a chance. One by one, they gently lifted the foals onto the sling. The silver one, the strongest of the group, wobbled onto the fabric without prompting, almost as if it understood what they were trying to do. The black foal fought weakly while the chestnut and palomino seemed too exhausted to resist. The dun colt remained motionless except for its labored breathing. Dragging the sling across the rough terrain was grueling work. The sun had reached its zenith, and Michael's leg throbbed in protest with each step. Sweat soaked his undershirt, and his vision swam with heat and exertion. But he persisted, stopping occasionally to offer the foals water from his canteen. By the time they reached his truck, Michael's body was screaming with exhaustion. Using the last of his strength, he fashioned a ramp from some old boards in the truck bed and carefully transferred each foal inside. Hang on, he told them, gently stroking the silver foal's damp neck. Just hang on. The drive back to the ranch house was tense, with Michael checking the rearview mirror constantly to make sure the foals were still breathing. The old barn behind his father's house wasn't much, but it would provide shade and shelter. As they pulled up to the weathered structure, Michael spotted an unfamiliar pickup parked nearby, and a woman in jeans and a light blue shirt emerged from the house. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she shielded her eyes against the sun as she approached. Dr. Sarah Reyes, she introduced herself, extending a hand. Your neighbor Frank called me, said you might need some fence posts replaced. Her eyes widened as she saw the cargo in Michael's truck bed. Those are Mustang foals, she said, closing the distance quickly. What happened? Found them abandoned out by the eastern fence line, Michael replied, his voice rough from thirst. They've been left to die. Reyes's professional demeanor took over as she immediately assessed the situation. They're severely dehydrated. How long have they been out there? Don't know. At least a day from the looks of it. We need to get them inside, cool them down, and get fluids into them right away, she said, already moving toward the truck. Do you have a barn or shelter? Michael nodded toward the dilapidated structure behind the house. It's not much, but it'll keep the sun off them. It'll have to do. I have to summon supplies in my truck. Together, they carried the foals into the barn, where Frank had already prepared a space with fresh straw. Dr. Reyes worked with quick efficiency, setting up IV fluids for the weakest foals, while instructing Michael on how to prepare the electrolyte solutions for the others. These are newborns, she said, examining the dun colt closely. No more than a week old. They shouldn't be separated from their mothers yet. There were no mares around, Michael said. Just these 5 left in the sun. Dr. Reyes frowned as she noticed the markings on the foal's flanks. These are identification codes, she said, tracing the numbers on the silver gray's hide. RC Ravencrest Equestrian. They're a large breeding operation that specializes in performance horses for wealthy clients. What would they be doing with Mustang foals? Michael asked, helping her position the black colt for an IV. They started a Mustang conservation program a few years ago. At least that's what they claim. Her expression darkened. Though I've heard rumors. What kind of rumors? That not all their breeding practices are ethical, that horses disappear. She met his eyes directly. Finding these foals abandoned like this, it doesn't look good. The silver-gray colt nudged Michael's arm as if seeking reassurance. Without thinking, he stroked its neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his fingers. Will they make it? He asked quietly. Doctor. Reyes surveyed the 5 struggling foals. The next 24 hours will tell. The dun and the black are in the worst shape. The others have a better chance. I'm not equipped for this, Michael admitted. I haven't dealt with horses in years, let alone newborns. Well, Mr. Connor, you're all they've got right now, Dr. Reyes replied simply. And they've got me for what it's worth. As if understanding her words, the silver-gray colt raised its head and looked directly at Michael, its gaze steady and unblinking. In that moment, something shifted inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before Afghanistan, a sense of purpose. I'll need supplies, he said, feed medication. I can help with that, Dr. Reyes nodded, and I'll come back tonight to check on them. As Dr. Reyes prepared to leave to gather more supplies, Michael remained in the barn with the foals. The silver gray had finally lain down, its eyes half closed but still watching him. The Palomino filly had curled up beside it while the chestnut dozed fitfully. The black colt remained wary, staying in the corner of the stall. The dun still hadn't moved much, its breathing shallow. Michael settled on an upturned bucket, realizing he was committed now. These abandoned foals needed him, and maybe in some way he couldn't yet define he needed them too. You're safe now, he whispered to the watching silver gray. I promise. For the first time since returning from war, Michael Connor made a promise he intended to keep. The first night with the foals stretched into an endless vigil. Michael moved his father's old recliner into the barn, positioning it where he could see all 5 Mustangs at once. Dr. Reyes had returned with supplies, milk replacer, antibiotics, electrolytes, and soft blankets. She'd shown him how to bottle feed the weakest foals, demonstrating a gentle but firm technique. Every 2 hours, she'd instructed before leaving. Even through the night, especially for the dun one he's hanging by a thread. Now in the hushed darkness, broken only by the soft glow of a battery-powered lantern, Michael checked his watch. Midnight. Time for another feeding. He moved carefully toward the makeshift stall where the foals rested on fresh hay. The silver gray lifted its head immediately, ears pivoting to track Michael's movement. Just me, Michael whispered. Easy, buddy. The dun colt lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its ribcage. Michael knelt beside it, cradling its head as he coaxed the nipple of the bottle between its lips. The foal suckled weakly, its eyes remaining closed. Come on, Michael urged. Just a little more. Behind him, the silver gray watched intently as if understanding the gravity of the situation. The chestnut filly had improved dramatically after just a few feedings, already showing signs of her spirited nature by pawing at the straw. The Palomino dozed peacefully, her condition stabilized. The black colt remained skittish, retreating whenever Michael approached, but had managed to drink from a shallow pan. As dawn broke, Michael stepped outside the barn to stretch his cramped muscles. The eastern horizon blazed orange, silhouetting the distant hills. Despite his exhaustion, a strange sort of peace had settled over him during the night's watch. For months since his discharge, he'd struggled with sleeplessness, his mind replaying scenes from combat in vivid detail. Last night focused entirely on keeping the foals alive, he'd found a temporary respite from those memories. Dr. Reyes arrived early, carrying a medical bag and a tray of coffee cups. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering him a steaming cup. "How was the night?" "4 of them are holding steady," Michael reported, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The dun hasn't improved much, still barely drinking." De Reyes nodded grimly and followed him into the barn. After examining each foal thoroughly, she confirmed Michael's assessment. "The silver gray and the chestnut are fighters," she said. "The Palomino and black are stabilizing, but the dun—" She shook her head. "We're doing everything we can, but sometimes it's not enough." Michael's jaw tightened. "I'm not giving up on him." "I didn't suggest you should," Reyes replied, her voice softening. "Just preparing you." She helped him change the bedding and showed him how to check for signs of infection around the strange markings on their flanks. Up close, Michael could see that the identifiers were tattooed rather than branded. "I've been thinking about these markings," Dr. Reyes said, examining the code on the silver gray's flank RC X0572. "It looks like a registration system, but it's not standard practice to tattoo foals this young, especially not Mustangs." "Why would they abandon them?" Michael asked, watching as the silver gray nuzzled his hands, seeking attention. "That's what bothers me," she frowned. "Ravencrest is a multi-million-dollar operation. Caroline Blackwood doesn't make careless mistakes. These foals were left deliberately." "But why, Bullies? I don't know," she admitted. "But I have a contact who used to work there. Let me make some calls." While Dr. Reyes stepped outside to use her phone, Michael continued tending to the foals. The silver gray followed him as he moved around the stall, displaying an unusual level of awareness for such a young animal. "You need names," Michael told them, scratching the silver gray's forehead. "Can't keep calling you by your colors." He studied the silver gray colt, noting the intelligent gleam in its eyes. "Silver," he decided. "That's you." The chestnut filly nudged his arm hard enough to make him stumble slightly. "And your flame, all that energy burning inside you." The black colt watched warily from the corner, tensing when Michael looked his way. "Jet for you, dark and fast." The Palomino filly's gentle demeanor had been evident from the start, her patience remarkable as Michael tended to her needs. "Star," he said, stroking her golden coat. "Bright even in the darkness." Finally, he knelt beside the struggling dun colt, whose life seemed to hang in balance with each shallow breath. "And you're Dune," he whispered, "strong enough to weather any storm." Reyes returned, her expression troubled. "My contact couldn't tell me much, said he signed too many non-disclosure agreements. But he did mention that Ravencrest has been developing a specialized breeding program for Mustangs with particular genetic traits. High performance, specific coloration, certain physical attributes." "What does that have to do with abandoning foals?" Michael asked. "I'm not sure yet," she replied. "But he seemed frightened. Said I should drop it, that Blackwood doesn't tolerate people asking questions." Michael looked down at the foals, at Silver's steady gaze, at Dune's struggling form. "Well, I'm asking questions," he said firmly. "Someone needs to answer for this." De Reyes studied him. "You're not planning to keep them, are you? Once they're healthy, they should go to a proper rescue facility." "I haven't thought that far ahead," Michael admitted. "Right now, I just want them to survive." But even as he said it, he knew something had changed. These abandoned foals had awakened something in him, a protective instinct he thought had died in Afghanistan alongside his unit. Later that afternoon, Frank Yellowhawk arrived, his ancient blue pickup raising a cloud of dust as it approached. The elderly rancher moved with the deliberate pace of a man who had seen more than his share of seasons, his weathered face deeply lined beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Heard you found some trouble, Frank said by way of greeting, eyeing the barn with interest. News travels fast, Michael replied. Small town. Dr. Reyes stops by the diner for breakfast, mentions she's treating abandoned foals at the Connor place. Folks notice. He followed Michael into the barn, his experienced eyes taking in the situation at a glance. Mustang foals, he said, nodding. And those markings Ravencrest's work. You know about Ravencrest? Michael asked, surprised. Frank's expression darkened. Everyone around here knows Ravencrest. Blackwood thinks she owns the land and everything on it. Been buying up ranches' water rights, pushing out small operators. He knelt with surprising agility for his age, examining each foal carefully. When he reached Silver, the silver-gray colt met his gaze steadily. This one has the old spirit, Frank said approvingly. Reminds me of the Mustangs I saw as a boy before they started rounding them up and penning them in. Dr. Reyes thinks Ravencrest is breeding them for specific traits, Michael explained. Frank nodded slowly. Heard rumors they take Mustangs from BLM roundups, claim they're adopting them for conservation, but really they're experimenting with bloodlines, trying to create some kind of superior horse they can sell to rich folks. But why abandon these five? Maybe they didn't measure up, Frank suggested grimly. Not perfect enough for Ravencrest standards. The idea made Michael's blood boil. He'd seen enough, killing enough, disregard for life in war zones. To think that these foals had been discarded like defective products was infuriating. The done one isn't doing well, he said, changing the subject. Frank moved to Dune's side, placing a gnarled hand on the struggling foal's neck. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. An old remedy, he explained, opening the pouch to reveal dried herbs. My grandmother taught me. Mix it with the milk, helps strengthen weak spirit. Michael hesitated, but something in Frank's confident manner made him trust the old man. I'll try anything at this point. They mixed the herbs with Dune's next bottle, and to Michael's surprise, the foal sucked with slightly more vigor than before. No guarantees, Frank cautioned, but sometimes the old ways help. As evening approached, Frank prepared to leave. I'll bring some better hay tomorrow. What you have is too coarse for newborns. I appreciate the help, Michael said. Frank paused at the barn door. Your father would be glad to see you doing this. He always said you had a way with animals, even when you were small. The comment caught Michael off guard. His relationship with his father had been complicated, a mixture of respect and distance that had only widened during his years in the military. I barely remember that part of myself, Michael admitted. It's still there, Frank said simply. Those foals can sense it. That's why they're responding to you. After Frank left, Michael sat with the foals as darkness fell again. Silver had positioned himself protectively near Dune, while Flame and Star rested nearby. Even Jet had crept closer to the group, though he still maintained his cautious distance from Michael. The night was peaceful until just after midnight, when Michael was startled awake by the sound of a vehicle approaching headlights, sweeping across the barn walls as it turned up his driveway. He reached instinctively for the rifle he kept nearby, a habit from his military days, and stepped outside. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows had parked in front of the house. A woman in an expensive-looking pantsuit emerged, her posture radiating authority. Even in the dim light, Michael could see she was attractive in a cold-polished way, her blonde hair pulled back severely from her face. Mr. Connor, she called out, spotting him by the barn. I'm Claire Blackwood, Director of Operations at Ravencrest Equestrian. Michael's grip tightened on his rifle, though he kept it pointed downward. It's past midnight, Ms. Blackwood. Not exactly business hours. She smiled thinly. This is rather urgent. I understand you found some Mustang foals that belong to our breeding program. I found 5 foals abandoned to die in the heat, Michael corrected, his voice hardening. If they're yours, that raises some serious questions. Claire maintained her professional demeanor. There's been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Those foals were part of a transport that had an accident. We've been searching for them. We're grateful you found them and would like to collect them immediately. A transport accident? Michael repeated skeptically. That left them miles from any road with no sign of their mothers, conveniently marked with your company's identification codes? The details aren't important, she said dismissively. What matters is that they're Ravencrest property. I have the paperwork in my car. We're prepared to compensate you for any inconvenience. They're not going anywhere, Michael stated firmly. They're in critical condition from being abandoned. One might not make it through the night. Claire's expression hardened. Mr. Connor, I don't think you understand. These aren't wild Mustangs. They're part of a proprietary breeding program worth millions. They belong to Ravencrest. And then you should have taken better care of them, Michael replied. Right now they're staying here under the veterinarian's care. This is a mistake, Claire warned, her voice taking on an edge. Carolyn Blackwood doesn't appreciate people interfering with her business. And I don't appreciate finding dying foals on my property, Michael countered. If you want to discuss this further, come back during daylight hours with a better explanation. They stared at each other for a long moment, the silence broken only by the soft whinny of one of the foals from inside the barn. Finally, Claire reached into her purse and extracted a business card. We'll be in touch, Mr. Connor, soon. She turned on her heel and returned to the SUV, which reversed smoothly and disappeared down the driveway. Michael remained outside long after the taillights had vanished, his mind racing. The woman's arrival confirmed his suspicions. These foals were important to Ravencrest for some reason, and her story about a transport accident was clearly fabrication. Inside the barn, he found Silver standing, alert, ears pricked forward, as if he'd been listening to the entire exchange. The silver-gray colt locked eyes with Michael, and in that moment a silent understanding passed between them. They'll be back, Michael told the foal, reaching out to stroke his neck. But I won't let them take you. As if in response, Silver leaned into his touch, and for the first time since returning from war, Michael felt the cold knot in his chest begin to loosen. Whatever Ravencrest wanted with these foals, they would have to go through Michael Connor to get them. And Michael had already survived one war. He was prepared to fight another if necessary. Morning arrived with a sense of foreboding that Michael couldn't shake. As he tended to the foals, administering their medications and preparing their formula, his mind kept returning to Claire Blackwood's midnight visit. The cold determination in her eyes told him this matter was far from resolved. Dune had made it through another night, though his condition remained precarious. Frank's herbal remedies seemed to have helped, but the dun colt still struggled with each breath. Silver stayed close to the weaker foal, occasionally nudging him as if encouraging him to keep fighting. Never seen anything like it, Dr. Reyes commented, arriving for her morning check. The silver-gray Silver, you called him, he's acting like a herd protector. That's unusual behavior for a foal his age. There's something special about him, Michael agreed, watching as Silver positioned himself between them and Dune, ears flicking alertly. They're all showing remarkable resilience, Doctor, Reyes said, completing her examination. Considering what they've been through. Michael described Blackwood's late-night visit while the veterinarian listened intently, her frown deepening with each detail. A transport accident, she scoffed. That's obviously a lie. These foals were systematically abandoned. The question is, why so? Frank suggested they didn't measure up to Ravencrest standards. That they're culling foals that don't fit their breeding program, DeForest Reyes nodded. If that's true, it's not just unethical, it's illegal, especially if these are Mustangs from federal lands. A soft nicker from Jet interrupted them. The black colt had been the most traumatized of the group, but this morning he cautiously approached Michael for the first time, sniffing at his outstretched hand before retreating to a safe distance. He's starting to trust you, Dr. Reyes observed. They all are. Small victories, Michael murmured, though he felt a surprising surge of pride. After Dr. Reyes left to attend other patients promising to return that evening, Michael decided to make a supply run to town. The foals were stable enough to leave for a short time, and he needed more formula and bedding. He also wanted information, anything that might explain Ravencrest's interest in these particular Mustangs. Lone Canyon was a small town that had seen better days. Once a thriving ranching community, many family operations had been sold off as younger generations moved to cities for better opportunities. The main street consisted of a handful of weathered buildings, a general store, a diner, a feed supply, and a small sheriff's office. Michael parked in front of Canyon Feed and Supply, a sprawling warehouse-like structure that smelled of sweet grain and leather. The owner, a heavy-set man named Dave Miller, greeted him with casual familiarity. Michael Connor, heard you're running a horse nursery these days. Word travels fast, Michael commented, selecting bags of bedding. Small town, Dave shrugged, echoing Frank's words from the day before. Those Mustang foals causing quite a stir, especially since Ravencrest's people were in here yesterday asking questions. Michael's head snapped up. What kind of questions? Wanted to know if anyone had come in buying supplies for newborn foals. Seemed mighty interested in their whereabouts. Dave leaned on the counter. I played dumb, never much cared for Ravencrest or their outfit. They've been squeezing out local ranches for years. I need to understand what I'm dealing with, Michael said. How much do you know about Ravencrest? Dave glanced around the empty store before lowering his voice. Official story is they're developing premium bloodlines for competition horses. Unofficial story is they've been manipulating Mustang genes for years trying to create some kind of super horse they can patent and control. They started with BLM adoptions, but rumors say they have moved on to more questionable methods. Like abandoning foals that don't meet their criteria, Michael suggested. Wouldn't put it past them. Dave nodded grimly. Caroline Blackwood doesn't tolerate imperfection. Woman's obsessed with creating the perfect horse. As Dave rang up Michael's purchases, the bell above the door jingled. Sheriff Daniel Foster stepped inside his uniform crisp, despite the heat badge gleaming on his chest. He nodded to Dave before turning to Michael. Mr. Connor, he said formally, mind if we have a word? Michael followed the sheriff outside, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. Got a complaint this morning, Foster said without preamble. From Ravencrest Equestrian. Says you're in possession of company property. 5 Mustang foals specifically. I've found 5 abandoned foals dying in the heat, Michael corrected. If they're Ravencrest, that raises serious questions about animal cruelty. The sheriff's expression remained neutral. Ms. Blackwood claims there was a transport accident. Said they've been looking for those foals. That's a lie, Michael stated flatly. Those foals were deliberately left to die. They were miles from any road, no sign of a trailer or accident. Just 5 newborns with Ravencrest's tags on them trapped in a ravine. Foster studied him for a long moment. You're sure about that? I've got a veterinarian who can confirm their condition. Dr. Reyes has been treating them since I found them. The sheriff nodded slowly. Sarah's good people. If she backs your story, that carries weight. He adjusted his hat against the glare of the sun. Look, Connor, I don't have a horse in this race, but Ravencrest has a lot of influence around her. They're talking about filing theft charges. Let them try, Michael replied, anger flaring. I've got nothing to hide. Just giving you a heads up, Foster said. This might get complicated. He turned to leave, then hesitated. How are they doing the foals? The unexpected concern in the sheriff's voice caught Michael off guard. 4 are improving. 1's touch and go. Foster nodded. My daughter keeps horses. Beautiful animals. With that, he returned to his patrol car and drove away. Back at the ranch, Michael found Frank Yellowhawk sitting on the porch steps, a thermos beside him. Brought you some coffee, the older man said, rising stiffly, and more of that herb mix for the dun colt. Thanks, Michael replied, unloading his supplies from the truck. Had a visit from the sheriff in town. Ravencrest's filing theft charges. Frank's weathered face remained impassive. Not surprised, Ravencrest doesn't like losing control of anything. They entered the barn together, finding the foals alert and responsive. Even Dune had shown marginal improvement, managing to stand for brief periods with trembling legs. Silver approached them immediately, nickering softly in greeting. As Michael prepared fresh bedding, Frank knelt beside each foal, examining them with experienced hands. When he reached Silver, he paused, his expression thoughtful. This one, he said, indicating the silver gray. He has the mark. The tattoo? Michael asked, confused. No, this. Frank pointed to a small white marking on Silver's forehead, barely visible beneath his forelock. It formed an irregular star pattern. In our stories, horses with this mark were spirit guides, messengers between worlds. Michael hadn't noticed the marking before. What does it mean? It means this is no ordinary foal, Frank replied. The old ones would say he was born with purpose. While Michael wasn't sure about mystical interpretations, he had to admit there was something unique about Silver. The silver-gray colt watched them with an intensity that seemed beyond his years, his movements deliberate and measured, unlike the other foals. Frank helped prepare the formula for the afternoon feeding, adding his herbal mixture to Dune's portion. As they worked, he shared stories of the wild Mustang herds that had once roamed freely through the canyons before government roundups and private interests had decimated their numbers. My grandfather could speak their language, Frank said, not with words, but with the heart. He said Mustangs carried the memory of freedom in their blood. That's why people like Caroline Blackwood want to control them to harness that spirit for profit. Michael considered the old man's words as he bottle-fed Dune. The dun colt suckled with more vigor today, his eyes open and alert for the first time since his rescue. He's fighting, Michael observed. They all are. Frank nodded. Question is, are you ready to fight for them? Before Michael could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Through the barn door, they could see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the house, dust billowing behind them. Looks like Ravencrest isn't waiting for the legal system, Frank commented grimly. Michael passed Dune to Frank and stepped outside, positioning himself between the barn and the approaching threat. Claire Blackwood emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by 2 men in suits and several others who looked more like security than executives. Mr. Connor, Claire called out, her voice carrying across the yard. I told you we'd be in touch. I have the legal paperwork here demanding the immediate return of Ravencrest property. Michael stood his ground. Those foals were abandoned to die. That's animal cruelty. I've reported it to Sheriff Foster. Claire's smile didn't reach her eyes. A misunderstanding that's been cleared up. The sheriff understands it was an unfortunate accident. Now please step aside and let my team collect the foals. No, Michael stated firmly. They're not healthy enough to be moved. One of the men in suits stepped forward, extending a document. This is a court order signed this morning by Judge Reynolds authorizing the repossession of livestock identified with Ravencrest equestrian markings. Michael didn't take the paper. Judge Reynolds signed this without hearing my side. Judge Reynolds understands the value of these animals to our research program, Claire replied smoothly. Now we can do this the easy way, or we can have you arrested for theft and obstruction. From inside the barn, Frank emerged, his tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. You're on private property, he called out, and those foals are evidence in an animal cruelty investigation. Claire turned her cold gaze to the elderly rancher. Mr. Yellowhawk, still interfering in matters that don't concern you, I see. Cruelty to animals concerns everyone, Frank replied evenly. The tension was broken by the arrival of another vehicle. Dr. Reyes's white pickup skidded to a stop beside the SUVs, and she jumped out, medical bag in hand. What's going on here? She demanded, striding forward. Dr. Reyes, Claire acknowledged with barely concealed annoyance. This doesn't involve you. As the treating veterinarian for these foals, it absolutely involves me, Dr. Reyes countered. They're under my medical care and not stable enough for transport. Claire signaled to her security team. Remove them anyway, carefully. As the men moved toward the barn, Michael stepped into their path. Touch those foals and you'll regret it. The lead security man, a burly figure with a military bearing, sized up Michael. Don't make this difficult, buddy. We've got a court order. And I've got 5 witnesses to animal abandonment, Michael shot back, including a veterinarian who documented their condition. Derek Byers pulled out her phone. I've already sent photos and medical reports to the State Veterinary Board and animal welfare authorities. Move those foals now and you'll be adding charges of endangerment to the existing cruelty investigation. Claire's composed facade cracked slightly. You don't understand what you're interfering with. These animals are part of a proprietary breeding program that represents millions in research investment. Is that why you left them to die? Michael challenged. Because they didn't meet your standards. A flicker of surprise crossed Claire's face before she regained control. I don't know what you're talking about. There was a transport accident. There was no accident, Frank interrupted. Those foals were culled left to die because they didn't match Ravencrest's perfect vision. It's been happening for years. Claire turned to her legal team, speaking in hushed tones. After a tense exchange, she faced Michael again. This isn't over, Mr. Connor. These foals legally belong to Ravencrest regardless of how they came into your possession. We'll return with additional legal measures. And I'll be ready, Michael promised, with documentation of everything I've found. With a final glare, Claire and her team retreated to their vehicles. As they pulled away, Dr. Reyes let out a breath she'd been holding. That was too close, she said, but they'll be back with more firepower. Judge Reynolds is in Ravencrest's pocket. Most of the local judiciary is. Then we need to move fast, Michael replied. Gather evidence, find out exactly what Ravencrest is doing with these Mustangs. Dr. Reyes nodded. I've already reached out to some contacts at the state level. If we can prove systematic animal cruelty, we can get the authorities involved who aren't under Ravencrest's influence. Inside the barn, the foals had huddled together during the confrontation with Silver, standing protectively in front of the others. As Michael approached, the silver-gray colt met his gaze steadily, as if understanding the battle that was brewing. "We need to know more about these markings," Michael said, examining the tattoo on Silver's flank. RCX0572. What does the X signify, and why were these five specifically targeted for disposal? Frank knelt beside Dune, checking his condition after the stress of the confrontation. In the old days, ranchers would cull animals that didn't match the desired traits. But modern breeding operations use genetic testing embryo selection. They don't typically wait until after birth to decide. Unless they were looking for something that only manifests after birth, Dr. Reyes suggested thoughtfully. Some traits in foals can't be predicted purely from genetics. As they spoke, Flame nudged Michael, insistently seeking attention. Her fiery personality had emerged more each day, a stark contrast to her near-death state when he had found her. Star grazed Michael's arm with gentle lips, while Jed observed from a cautious distance, still wary but no longer panicking at human presence. "They're all showing distinct personalities," Michael observed, "even at this young age." "Temperament has always been the hardest thing to breed for," Frank noted. "You can select for color, size, speed, but heart and spirit, those come from somewhere deeper." De Reyes checked her watch. "I need to make some calls. See if I can get state inspectors out here before Ravencrest tries again. In the meantime, document everything: feeding schedules, medications, progress notes. We need to build a case." After she left, Michael and Frank continued caring for the foals. The confrontation had drained them all, but there was a new sense of purpose in their actions. These five young lives had become the center of a battle that was clearly about more than just ownership. As evening settled over the ranch, Michael sat in the barn doorway, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Silver stood beside him, the foal's small body radiating a surprising warmth and solidity. "What makes you so special?" Michael murmured, stroking the silver-gray coat. "What is Ravencrest so afraid of?" Silver turned his head, meeting Michael's gaze with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. In that moment, something shifted in Michael's perception. These weren't just abandoned animals he was caring for out of duty or compassion. They had become something more, a cause worth fighting for, a purpose that had been missing since he'd left the battlefield. Frank joined him, easing down onto an overturned bucket with a soft grunt. "Beautiful evening," he commented, gazing at the sunset. "Hard to believe people are capable of such cruelty on days like this." "People have always been capable of both great beauty and terrible darkness," Frank replied. "The question is which one we choose to serve." They sat in companionable silence as darkness crept across the land. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear Texas sky, untouched by city lights. "My grandfather used to say that stars are the campfires of those who have gone before us," Frank said softly, "watching over the living, guiding our way." Michael thought of his father, of his fallen comrades, wondering if they were indeed watching. Would they approve of this new battle he'd chosen? "I think they would," Frank said, as if reading his thoughts. "Standing against cruelty is always the right path." Inside the barn, the foals settled for the night, their soft breathing a counterpoint to the chorus of night insects outside. Dune had shown more improvement throughout the day, standing longer, drinking more eagerly. His eyes, once dull with pain, now held a spark of life. "He's going to make it," Michael realized aloud. "Because you gave him a chance," Frank replied. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." As Frank departed for the night, promising to return at dawn, Michael prepared for another vigil in the barn. He checked each foal one last time, ensuring they were comfortable and secure. When he reached Silver, the silver-gray colt was already watching him, ears pricked forward attentively. "We've got trouble coming," Michael told him quietly. "Ravencrest won't give up easily." Silver snorted softly as if in agreement. Then, with deliberate movements, the foal stepped closer and leaned his head against Michael's chest, a gesture of trust so profound it caught Michael off guard. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet breathing of five young lives he'd pulled back from the brink, Michael Connor made a silent vow. Whatever Ravencrest was hiding, whatever cruel purpose had led to these foals being abandoned, he would uncover it. And no matter what legal or political pressure they brought to bear, he would protect these Mustangs with everything he had. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time since returning from war, Michael felt truly alive. The next morning dawned with a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the Texas humidity. Michael had spent another night in the barn, dozing fitfully between feedings, his senses alert to any unusual sounds. He knew Ravencrest wouldn't give up easily. Dune had turned a corner during the night, standing on his own for nearly 10 minutes before lying down again. The improvement felt like a personal victory. Flame continued to show her spirited nature prancing around the stall whenever Michael approached. Star remained gentle and sweet, while Jet had begun cautiously accepting Michael's touch without flinching. And Silver the Silver Gray continued to display an awareness that seemed beyond his years, watching over the others like a seasoned herd leader. Andreas arrived early carrying a stack of documents along with her medical bag. "I've been up all night researching Ravencrest," she announced, spreading papers across a weathered table in the barn. "What am I looking at?" Michael asked, studying the materials printouts of scientific articles, breeding records, financial statements. "Ravencrest Equestrian isn't just breeding horses," Dr. Reyes explained, pointing to a highlighted section. "They're creating a monopoly on Mustang genetics. They've been systematically collecting DNA from wild herds, patenting specific genetic sequences, and using them to develop what they call heritage bloodlines they can control exclusively." "How is that legal?" Michael asked. "The legality is questionable, but they've exploited loopholes. They claim they're preserving endangered bloodlines, but in reality, they're privatizing what should be a public resource. These Mustangs belong to all Americans as part of our heritage." Frank arrived as they were talking, carrying fresh hay and supplies. He listened intently as Dr. Reyes continued. "I managed to get in touch with a geneticist who consulted for them briefly. She was disturbed by what she saw. According to her, Ravencrest isn't just selecting for physical traits. They're attempting to breed for specific behavioral characteristics." "Like what?" Michael asked. "Docility, trainability, reduced flight response. They want Mustangs with the appearance and hardiness of wild horses, but the temperament of domesticated ones." Frank shook his head. "They're trying to tame the wild spirit that makes Mustangs what they are." "Exactly," Dr. Reyes nodded. "And these foals," she gestured to the 5 Mustangs, watching them curiously, "might represent failures in that program. Foals that showed early signs of being too independent, too wild." Michael's gaze drifted to Silver, who stood alert, ears pricked toward their conversation. "That's why they want them back so badly. Not to save them, but to eliminate evidence of their culling practices." "I've contacted state authorities and federal wildlife officials," Dr. Reyes said. "But Ravencrest has powerful friends. It could take time to get a proper investigation." "Time we may not have," Michael replied grimly. "We need more concrete evidence of what they're doing." Their planning was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the barn door, they could see a sleek white luxury car pulling up beside Dr. Reyes's truck. The driver's door opened, and a tall, distinguished woman in her late 50s emerged, straightening her expensive suit jacket. "Carolyn Blackwood," Frank muttered, "the devil herself." "She came personally," Dr. Reyes said, surprise evident in her voice. "We must have hit a nerve." Michael stepped outside to meet the visitor, acutely aware of his own disheveled appearance after a night in the barn. Carolyn Blackwood approached with the confident stride of a woman accustomed to getting her way, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the heat, her tanned face set in a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Connor," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Caroline Blackwood, I believe we have a situation to resolve." Michael ignored the outstretched hand. "Nothing to resolve. Those foals were abandoned to die. That's criminal." Blackwood's smile didn't waver. "I understand your concern. There was an unfortunate incident during transport, and we're grateful you found the foals. But they remain Ravencrest property, part of a research program that represents years of work and millions in investment. Research that includes leaving newborns to die if they don't meet your standards," Michael challenged. For a fraction of a second, Blackwood's composed mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Then the smile returned. "A serious accusation, Mr. Connor. Completely unfounded, of course. We value every animal in our breeding program." "Then explain why these foals were abandoned miles from any road with no sign of their mothers or any transport vehicle," Michael pressed. Blackwood glanced toward the barn where Dr. Reyes and Frank now stood watching. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm prepared to make you a generous offer for your inconvenience. They're not for sale, Michael stated flatly. Everything has a price, McConnell Blackwood replied smoothly. Your ranch, for instance. I understand it's seen better days. My company could offer you fair market value plus a substantial premium. You could start fresh somewhere else without the burden of this struggling property. The offer caught Michael off guard. He looked around at the weathered buildings, the sagging fences. The place held more painful memories than good ones. Yet in the days since finding the foals, it had begun to feel like home again in a way it hadn't for decades. Not interested, he said firmly. Blackwood's smile tightened. I admire your principles, but you're fighting a losing battle. I have judges, politicians, and regulators in my corner. These foals will return to Ravencrest facilities today, tomorrow, or next week. The only question is how difficult you want to make it for yourself. Is that a threat? Michael asked quietly. A reality check, Blackwood corrected. I understand you're a veteran. You've seen enough conflict. Why invite more into your life? Take the money. Walk away. From inside the barn came a sharp, clear whinny, silver sounding almost like a challenge. Blackwood's gaze shifted toward the sound, her expression hardening momentarily. The silver gray, she said. RCX0572. He's particularly valuable to our program. His name is Silver, Michael corrected. And he's not going anywhere. Blackwood studied him with new interest. You name them? Becoming attached to research animals. It's unwise, Mr. Connor. When they stopped being research animals the moment you abandoned them, Michael replied. Reyes stepped forward, medical charts in hand. Mrs. Blackwood, as the attending veterinarian, I've documented extensive evidence of neglect and cruelty. These foals were severely dehydrated, malnourished, and exhibited rope burns consistent with being restrained and abandoned. I've submitted my findings to state authorities. Blackwood barely glanced at her. Dr. Ray is still harboring resentment over our rejected grant application last year. This vendetta doesn't become you. She flushed but held her ground. This isn't personal. It's about animal welfare laws being violated. Laws are open to interpretation, Blackwood replied dismissively, and enforcement requires evidence that will stand up to scrutiny from my legal team. She turned back to Michael. One last chance, Mr. Connor. Take the money, sign the foals over to me, or face the consequences. Get off my property, Michael said quietly. Blackwood's facade of civility vanished. Very well. Remember that you chose this path. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document, which she thrust toward Michael. A court order freezing all assets on this property, including livestock, pending resolution of ownership claims. Signed by a federal judge this morning. Michael took the paper, scanning it quickly. This prevents me from moving the foals, but it also prevents you from taking them for now. True, Blackwood conceded, but it also means you can't sell this ranch, can't transfer the foals to another facility, can't do anything without court approval. How long can you afford to care for 5 high-maintenance animals with your limited resources? Mr. Connor, time is on my side. With that parting shot, Blackwood returned to her car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. She's right about one thing, Dr. Reyes said grimly. Ravencrest has the resources to drag this out indefinitely. Then we need to find evidence she can't fight, Michael replied, still staring after the departing car. Something so damning it won't matter how many judges she has in her pocket. Frank had remained silent during the confrontation, but now he spoke up. I might know someone who can help, a former Ravencrest employee who left under difficult circumstances. She might be willing to talk now. Who, Dr. Reyes asked. Maria Redstone. She worked in their breeding program for years before quitting suddenly last spring. She's been living off-grid since then, not taking visitors. But she might see me. It's worth a try, Michael agreed. Meanwhile, I'll go through these documents, see if there's anything we can use. As Frank departed to seek out his contact, Dr. Reyes completed her morning examination of the foals. All 5 showed improvement, with Dune finally turning the corner toward recovery. It's remarkable, she commented, checking the Dun's vital signs. A week ago, I wouldn't have given him a 10% chance of survival. Now he's holding his own. He's a fighter, Michael said, watching as Dune wobbled over to join the others. Dr. Reyes packed her medical bag, expression thoughtful. There's something Blackwood said that's bothering me. She specifically mentioned Silver by his identification number, called him particularly valuable. Why this foal above the others? Michael approached the silver-gray colt who met his gaze with that same unsettling intelligence. Silver has shown the most advanced behavior. He protects the others, seems to understand conversations. That could be it. Reyes nodded. If Ravencrest is breeding for specific behavioral traits, Silver might represent something important to their program, something they're desperate to control. After Dr. Reyes left for her other appointments, Michael spent the morning reviewing the documents she'd brought. Most were technical papers filled with scientific jargon about genetic markers and behavioral phenotypes. But one section caught his attention. Subject RC X057 series demonstrates unexpected preservation of type A. Response patterns despite selective breeding protocols designed to minimize these traits. Further study required to determine whether genetic isolation or termination of the bloodline is indicated. Michael wasn't a scientist, but the implications seemed clear. Ravencrest program was attempting to eliminate certain natural behaviors in Mustangs, likely the very traits that made them wild and free. And this particular group had somehow retained those characteristics despite their efforts. Around noon, a battered blue pickup appeared on the horizon, Frank returning from his expedition. As the vehicle drew closer, Michael could see he had a passenger, a middle-aged Native American woman with streaks of gray in her long dark hair. Her expression guarded. Frank made the introductions as they settled on the porch. Maria Redstone, Michael Connor. Maria worked in Ravencrest Breeding Division for 12 years before quitting last spring. Maria nodded curtly, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings as if expecting danger. Frank says you've found some of Ravencrest's discards. I need to see them. Michael led her to the barn where the 5 foals were resting in the relative cool. Maria approached slowly, her focused gaze taking in every detail of their appearance. When she reached Silver, she inhaled sharply. The silver gray, she said, pointing to the small white star pattern on his forehead. This is why they want him back so badly. What does it mean? Michael asked. Maria knelt beside Silver, who regarded her calmly. In the old stories, this marking signified horses that couldn't be broken. Ravencrest has been trying to eliminate it from their breeding program for years. They call it the resistance trait. Foals born with this marking consistently reject domestication, retain wild behaviors regardless of training methods. And the others? Michael asked, glancing at Flamejet Star and Dune. All from the same bloodline. Ravencrest scientists identified a genetic sequence they believe correlates with the trait. They've been trying to breed it out through selective culling. Her voice hardened. I was told the rejected foals were being humanely euthanized or placed in sanctuaries. When I discovered they were simply being abandoned to die, I couldn't be part of it anymore. How many? Frank asked quietly. Dozens over the years, Maria replied, her face grim. But these 5 are special. They're from their most advanced breeding program, the X series, supposed to combine the hardiness of Mustangs with complete trainability. But the resistance trait kept appearing, defying their genetic predictions. Why not just avoid this bloodline altogether, Michael wondered. Because it also carries traits they desperately want. Endurance, intelligence, adaptability. Caroline Blackwood is obsessed with creating the perfect horse, one that looks wild but obeys without question. These foals represent the failure of that vision. Silver nudged Maria's hand gently as if confirming her words. She stroked his neck with a sad smile. They call them defective, but they're actually the most perfect examples of what Mustangs truly are. Untamable spirits. That's why Ravencrest wants them destroyed. They undermine everything their program stands for. Would you testify to this? Michael asked. To the deliberate abandonment of foals that don't meet their criteria. Maria's expression clouded. Ravencrest ruined me when I left. Blacklisted me from every equine facility in the state, threatened legal action over confidentiality agreements. I've been hiding for months. But you're the key to stopping this, Michael pressed. Without your testimony, it's our word against a powerful corporation. Before Maria could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Through the barn door, they could see Dr. Reyes's truck skidding to a halt in front of the house. She leapt out, running toward them with uncharacteristic urgency. Michael, she called, they've issued a seizure order for the ranch. Sheriff Foster just called to warn me. They're coming with federal marshals within the hour. On what grounds? Michael demanded. They're claiming the ranch is being used for illegal activities, animal theft, interference with agricultural research. It's all fabricated, but they've got a judge to sign off. Maria stood abruptly. I need to leave. If Raven Crest knows I'm here... Wait, Michael interrupted. We need your help. These foals will die if Raven Crest gets them back. Maria hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. I can't fight them openly. They're too powerful. Frank placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. There comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. These foals survive for a reason. Maybe to give us all a chance to right a wrong. As they debated their options, Silver suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward alertly. The silver-gray colt pawed the ground and let out a clear, piercing whinny, a warning. Moments later, they heard it too, multiple vehicles approaching from the main road. Michael moved to the barn door, spotting a procession of black SUVs and official vehicles coming down the long driveway, dust billowing behind them. They're here, he said grimly. Decision time. Maria looked from the approaching convoy to the 5 foals huddled together in the stall, Silver standing protectively in front of the others. Something in her expression shifted resolution, replacing fear. I'll testify, she said firmly, but not just about the abandonment, about everything. The breeding program, the genetic manipulation, the patenting of wild horse DNA that should belong to the American people, all of it. Michael nodded gratefully. Reyes, can you get Maria somewhere safe until we can arrange for her formal statement? My clinic has a back exit, Dr. Reyes confirmed. We can slip out while they're focused on the ranch. As the vehicles drew closer, Michael turned to Frank. I need you to document everything that happens here. Use your phone, record every word. The elderly rancher nodded, pulling out his cell phone. They won't take those foals without a fight. Michael looked back at the 5 Mustangs one last time before facing the approaching confrontation. Silver met his gaze, the colt's eyes reflecting a determination that matched his own. No, Michael agreed quietly. They won't. With Maria and Dr. Reyes slipping out the barn's back door, Michael and Frank stepped outside to meet the convoy of vehicles now filling the front yard of Connor Ranch. Sheriff Foster emerged first, his expression troubled. Behind him came Federal Marshals Raven Crest's security team and Claire Blackwood, who wore a triumphant smile. Mr. Connor, Foster began, his discomfort evident. I have a federal seizure warrant for this property and all livestock present, specifically 5 Mustang foals identified as property of Ravencrest Equestrian. Those foals were abandoned today, Michael replied evenly. Saving them isn't theft. One of the marshals stepped forward, a stern-faced woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Sir, we're not here to debate. The court has ruled. Please step aside and allow us to execute this warrant. Frank had positioned himself slightly behind Michael, his phone recording discreetly. Claire approached, legal documents in hand. We've been more than patient, Mr. Connor, she said coldly. Now your interference ends. Michael noticed Sheriff Foster scanning the area, a slight frown creasing his brow. Where's Dr. Reyes? I thought she'd be here. Emergency call, Michael lied smoothly. Colic and a show horse over in Fisher County. Claire signaled to the security team. Search the property, the barn first. As the men moved toward the barn, Michael blocked their path. Those foals are under veterinary care. Moving them could endanger their health. We have qualified handlers, Claire replied dismissively, and our own veterinary staff. The same staff that abandoned them in the first place, Michael challenged. The female marshal intervened. Sir, obstruction of a federal order is a criminal offense. Please cooperate, or we'll be forced to restrain you. Michael felt the weight of his military training settling over him, the calm clarity that came in moments of crisis. He'd faced worse odds in Afghanistan, but there he'd had a weapon and a team. Here he had only the righteousness of his cause and an elderly rancher as backup. Before you proceed, he said carefully, you should know that a formal complaint has been filed with state animal welfare authorities regarding Ravencrest's treatment of these foals. Moving them now could constitute interference with an ongoing investigation. The marshal hesitated, glancing at her colleague. Sheriff Foster seized the opening. He's right about the complaint, the sheriff confirmed. Dr. Reyes submitted detailed documentation yesterday. State investigators have been notified. Claire stepped forwards, irritation flashing across her face. This is a delay tactic, nothing more. The federal order supersedes any pending local investigation. Not necessarily, the marshal replied, her tone measured. If there's credible evidence of animal cruelty, we may need to reassess. As they argued legal technicalities, a distant rumble of engines drew everyone's attention. A dust cloud approached from the main road, three vehicles moving at high speed toward the ranch. Leading the convoy was Dr. Reyes's white pickup, followed by an official-looking SUV with government plates and a news van with a satellite dish mounted on the roof. "What is this?" Claire demanded, watching the approaching vehicles with growing alarm. Michael suppressed a smile. Reinforcements. The vehicles pulled to a stop beside the assembled group. Dr. Reyes emerged from her truck accompanied by a man in a crisp suit carrying a briefcase. From the government SUV stepped a woman in a formal uniform bearing the insignia of the State Animal Welfare Division. The news van disgorged a reporter and cameraman who immediately began setting up equipment. "Dr. Valerie Reyes," she introduced herself to the marshals. "These foals are under my medical care. This is Timothy Reed, attorney specializing in animal welfare law, and Inspector Lisa Montgomery from the State Department of Agriculture Animal Cruelty Investigation Unit." The inspector approached, clipboard in hand. "We've received serious allegations regarding Ravencrest Equestrian's treatment of Mustang foals. I'm here to conduct an immediate assessment." Claire intercepted her. "This property is subject to a federal seizure order. Your state investigation will have to wait." "Actually," Reed interjected, holding up a document, "I've just obtained an emergency injunction from Judge Hamilton of the Fifth Circuit. It temporarily suspends a seizure order, pending evaluation of the animal's condition and the cruelty allegations." The marshals examined the injunction while Claire sputtered in disbelief. The reporter edged closer, microphone extended, camera rolling. "Is it true that Ravencrest Equestrian has been systematically abandoning foals that don't meet their breeding standards? We have sources alleging a pattern of cruelty spanning years." Claire whirled around, her composure cracking. "No comment. Turn that camera off immediately." Michael noticed Sheriff Foster quietly stepping back from the confrontation, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. The lawman caught Michael's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The inspector from the Animal Welfare Division moved toward the barn. "I need to examine these foals immediately." Michael led her inside, where the 5 Mustangs had clustered together in their stall. Silver stood at the front, ears pricked forward alertly, the white star marking on his forehead, catching the light. Behind him, Flame pawed restlessly at the straw, while Starjet and Dune watched with wary eyes. "These are the foals in question," Michael explained. "Found them 7 days ago in a ravine about 2 miles east of here. No sign of their mothers, no evidence of any transport accident, as Ravencrest claims." The inspector photographed each foal, methodically paying special attention to their tattoos and the now healing marks where ropes had cut into their hides. Reyes joined them, providing medical records and documentation of their condition upon discovery. "According to my assessment, these foals were deliberately abandoned," Dr. Reyes stated firmly. "The pattern of dehydration and injuries is inconsistent with any accidental scenario." Outside, they could hear raised voices as the reporter continued pressing Claire for answers. The cameraman had positioned himself to capture the confrontation, much to Claire's visible fury. The inspector completed her examination and rejoined the group outside. "Based on preliminary findings, there is sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation into alleged animal cruelty. These foals will remain under Dr. Reyes's care, pending the outcome." Claire stepped forward, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This is outrageous. Ravencrest will challenge this in every court available. Those animals represent millions in proprietary research. Research that apparently includes abandoning newborns to dish." "Oh," the reporter interjected, microphone thrust forward. "No comment," Claire snapped before turning to Michael. "This isn't over Connor, not by a long shot." As Ravencrest's team retreated to their vehicles, Michael felt a momentary surge of victory, but he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. This was merely a reprieve, not a resolution. The marshals departed after conferring with their superiors by phone, leaving Sheriff Foster behind. Once the others had gone, the sheriff approached Michael with a rueful expression. "You pulled off quite a maneuver," he said quietly, "but Ravencrest isn't going to take this lying down. They've got connections in places you can't imagine." "I know," Michael acknowledged, "but at least we bought some time." Foster glanced toward the barn. "For what it's worth, I'm glad. Never sat right with me how they treat those wild horses. My daughter would never forgive me if I helped take those foals. After the sheriff departed, Michael joined Dr. Reyes Reed and Inspector Montgomery in the barn to discuss next steps. The emergency injunction gives us 72 hours, Reed explained. After that, we need more substantial evidence to prevent Ravencrest from reclaiming the foals. What about Maria Redstone's testimony? Michael asked. Valuable, but we need documentation, the inspector replied. Records, internal memos, anything that proves systematic culling of foals that don't meet their criteria. Darrayus leaned against the stall door, absently stroking Silver's neck. Maria mentioned other employees who were disturbed by the program. If we could find them, time is against us, Reed cautioned. Ravencrest will be working every angle to get that injunction lifted. The conversation was interrupted by Frank's return. He had escorted the reporter to her van after providing a statement about the foal's rescue. Media coverage is a double-edged sword, the elderly rancher commented. Puts pressure on Ravencrest but also makes them desperate. Michael looked at the 5 foals now huddled together in their stall. In just a week, they had transformed from near death to vibrant young animals, each with distinct personalities emerging. Silver maintained his watchful leadership, Flame her boundless energy, Star her gentle nature, Jet his cautious intelligence, and Dune his quiet resilience. They had become more than rescue animals. They represented something fundamental about freedom and the right to exist on one's own terms. There's another approach, Michael said slowly. Maria mentioned that Ravencrest has been patenting genetic sequences from wild Mustangs. If those horses were taken from federal lands, wouldn't that make their genetics public property? Reed straightened interest, sparking in his eyes. Potentially, the Bureau of Land Management has strict rules about Mustangs adopted from federal herds. If Ravencrest used those horses in their breeding program, without proper permissions, it would invalidate their patents, Dr. Reyes finished, and their claim of ownership over these foals. We need to find out where their foundation stock came from, the inspector added. BLM keeps detailed records. As night fell and the others departed to pursue these new leads, Michael remained in the barn with the foals. The past hours had been a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and confrontations, but now in the quiet darkness, he could reflect on how dramatically his life had changed. In just 1 week, he'd returned to this ranch, a broken man, haunted by memories of war, disconnected from his past and uncertain of his future. Now he found himself at the center of a battle that had given him purpose again, a reason to fight that didn't involve taking lives but saving them. Silver approached the stall door, nickering softly. Michael reached out to stroke the silver-grazed neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath his fingers. We bought some time, he told the colt quietly, but the real fight is just beginning. Frank returned around midnight, carrying a thermos of coffee and news from town. The story's spreading, he reported, settling onto an upturned bucket. Local station ran a piece about the Mustang 5 rescued from certain death. People are asking questions about Ravencrest's breeding practices. Public opinion won't sway a federal judge, Michael replied, accepting a cup of coffee. Maybe not, Frank conceded, but it makes backroom deals harder to hide. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the soft breathing of the sleeping foals. Finally, Frank spoke again, his voice contemplative. When I was a boy, my grandfather took me to see the wild herds. Hundreds of Mustangs running free across the plains, manes flying like banners in the wind. He paused, lost in memory. He told me the horses carried the spirit of the land itself, untamed, resilient, answering to no master but the open schema. Now corporations want to patent that spirit, Michael said bitterly. Frank nodded slowly. The old ones would say that some things cannot be owned. They can be respected, honored, even partnered with, but never possessed. Try telling that to Ravencrest. Men like Blackwood understand only one language proof that their actions violate the white man's laws. Frank's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Fortunately, I think we're about to provide exactly that. The next morning dawned with a sense of renewed purpose. Dr. Reyes arrived early, bringing news that Maria Redstone had been safely relocated to a friend's ranch in a neighboring county where she was preparing a formal statement for the authorities. She's also provided a list of other former Ravencrest employees who might be willing to testify, Dr. Reyes reported. Reed is contacting them now. As they tended to the foals, a call came in from Inspector Montgomery. Dr. Reyes put it on speaker so Michael could hear. "We found something significant," the inspector said, excitement evident in her voice. "BLM records show that Ravencrest acquired 12 Mustang mares in 2015 through the adoption program. The adoption contract specifically prohibited using them for commercial breeding or genetic research without special permission they never requested or received. So their entire breeding program is built on a violation of federal regulations," Dr. Reyes asked. "Exactly. And there's more. The BLM is conducting an audit of all Ravencrest adoptions dating back 10 years. Preliminary findings suggest a pattern of violations that could result in substantial penalties." Michael felt a surge of hope. Is it enough to stop them from claiming these foals? "It complicates their case significantly," the inspector replied. "If their breeding program operated illegally from the start, their ownership claims become highly questionable." After the call ended, Michael and Dr. Reyes exchanged cautiously optimistic looks. For the first time, they had tangible leverage against Ravencrest's legal machinery. The foals sensed the shift in mood. Flame pranced around the stall with renewed energy, while Star nudged Reyes affectionately. Even Jet had grown bold enough to accept treats directly from Michael's hand. Dune, though still the weakest, now stood steadily for longer periods, his eyes bright with improving health. And Silver, the silver-gray colt, watched it all with his characteristic intensity, the white star marking on his forehead, seeming to glow in the morning light. When Michael approached, the foal pressed his head against the man's chest in a gesture that felt remarkably like solidarity. "We might actually win this," Dr. Reyes said softly, watching the interaction. Michael nodded, allowing himself to believe it might be true. These 5 Mustangs, abandoned to die because they retained the wild spirit their ancestors had carried for generations, had become symbols of something larger than themselves: the right of wild things to remain wild, the value of traits that couldn't be controlled or commodified. As the morning progressed, more allies arrived at the ranch. Reed brought documents detailing the legal challenges they were preparing. The reporter returned with a cameraman to film a feature on the foal's recovery. Even Sheriff Foster stopped by, ostensibly to check on the property, but clearly showing his support through his presence. By midday, the ranch had transformed from an isolated battleground to the center of a growing movement. Local ranchers dropped by with hay donations. Children from a nearby 4-H club brought handmade blankets for the foals. An elderly woman arrived with a photo album showing Mustang herds that had once roamed freely across the region, now reduced to managed populations in designated areas. Michael watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. The public support was heartening, but he knew Ravencrest wouldn't surrender easily. The corporation had too much invested in their breeding program, too much to lose if their practice were exposed. His concerns proved prescient when Frank returned from town with troubling news. "Ravencrest lawyers have filed an emergency appeal with the federal court in Dallas," the elderly rancher reported. "They're claiming irreparable harm to their research program if the foals aren't returned immediately." "On what grounds?" Michael demanded. "They're alleging the foals carry proprietary genetic markers that constitute trade secrets," Frank explained. "They're claiming our possession threatens the security of their entire research program." Reed arrived shortly after confirming the news. "The hearing is set for tomorrow morning. Judge Ellington will preside." "Is that good or bad for us?" Michael asked. "Neutral, I think. Ellington is known for being thorough, not easily swayed by corporate influence." Reed spread documents across the kitchen table. "But we need to be prepared. Ravencrest will bring their full legal arsenal." As they strategized into the evening, Michael periodically checked on the foals. During one such visit, he found Silver standing alert at the stall door, ears pricked forward as if listening to their planning session. The colt's intelligent gaze followed Michael's movements, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. "I won't let them take you," Michael promised quietly, stroking Silver's silver-gray neck. "Any of you." The foal leaned into his touch, a gesture of trust that tightened Michael's resolve. These animals had survived against impossible odds. They'd fought for life when abandoned to die. Now it was his turn to fight for their future. That night, as a full moon rose over Connor Ranch, casting silver light across the weathered buildings, Michael sat on the porch steps with Frank. The elderly rancher had brought his old guitar and played soft melodies that drifted through the warm Texas air. "My grandfather used to say that some battles aren't just fought in courtrooms or battlefields. Frank mused between songs. They're fought in the heart where courage meets fear, where right faces wrong. Michael nodded understanding. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of their struggle against Ravencrest, with the foal's fate hanging in the balance. But tonight, under the vast canopy of stars, he allowed himself to feel the quiet certainty that they were on the right side of this fight, standing for something that transcended legal arguments and corporate interests. Inside the barn, 5 young Mustangs rested peacefully, unaware that they had become the center of a battle that would decide not just their individual fates, but potentially the future of wild horses across the American West. Their journey from abandoned foals to symbols of resistance had only just begun. The Dallas federal courthouse loomed before them, an imposing structure of stone and glass that seemed to embody the weight of the legal system itself. Michael straightened his borrowed tie, uncomfortable in the suit Reed had insisted he wear. It felt strange after days in dusty ranch clothes, but he understood the importance of appearances today. DeRay Reyes and Frank flanked him as they climbed the wide steps, joined by Reed carrying a bulging briefcase. Inside, the marble-floored lobby echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Security guards directed them to courtroom 3B, where their case would be heard. "Remember," Reed cautioned quietly as they walked, "Judge Ellington values precision and facts, no emotional appeals unless she opens the door for them." They entered the courtroom to find Ravencrest's team already assembled, 6 attorneys in expensive suits, arranged at the plaintiff's table with Claire Blackwood seated directly behind them. At the center of the group sat Caroline Blackwood herself, immaculately dressed and radiating confidence. Michael took his seat at the defense table, acutely aware of how outnumbered they appeared. But then the courtroom doors opened again, and familiar faces began filing in. Sheriff Foster Maria Redstone, accompanied by 2 security guards, Inspector Montgomery, and several people Michael didn't recognize, but Reed greeted as former Ravencrest employees willing to testify. Judge Elena Ellington entered, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. After the procedural formalities, Ravencrest's lead attorney rose, a polished man with calculated gestures. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of property recovery. Ravencrest Equestrian seeks the immediate return of 5 Mustang foals clearly identified with our client's registration numbers, currently being held at the defendant's ranch. These animals represent years of legitimate research and significant financial investment." The attorney presented documents detailing Ravencrest's breeding program, emphasizing its contributions to equine science and conservation. He dismissed the allegations of abandonment as unfounded accusations by individuals with personal grievances against the company. When Reed rose to present their defense, his approach was methodical, beginning with Dr. Reyes's detailed documentation of the foal's condition when found. "These animals were deliberately abandoned, Your Honor," Reed stated firmly. "The evidence of dehydration, malnutrition, and restraint injuries is consistent with systematic culling, not any accidental scenario Ravencrest has claimed." He presented affidavits from Maria Redstone and 3 other former employees, all testifying to Ravencrest's practice of disposing of foals that didn't meet specific criteria. But the most compelling evidence came next. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we've discovered that the foundation of Ravencrest's entire Mustang breeding program violates federal regulations." Reed introduced the BLM records indicating that Ravencrest had misused adopted Mustangs, using them for commercial breeding without required permissions. Judge Ellington leaned forward, her interest visibly piqued. "Are you suggesting, Counselor, that the plaintiff's claim to these foals is invalid due to regulatory violations in their breeding program?" "Precisely, Your Honor. Ravencrest Equestrian cannot claim ownership of animals produced through a program that violated federal law from its inception." Ravencrest's attorneys objected strenuously, claiming the adoption regulations were administrative details irrelevant to the ownership question. The judge allowed them to present counter-arguments, which centered on the significant investment Ravencrest had made in developing what they termed enhanced heritage bloodlines. During a brief recess, Michael stepped into the hallway for air, his mind spinning with legal arguments. He found himself wondering about the foals now being cared for by a local veterinary student Reed had arranged to stay at the ranch during the hearing. Frank joined him, offering a bottle of water. "How are you holding up?" "Feels strange," Michael admitted. "Fighting with paperwork instead of weapons." The elderly rancher nodded. "Different battlefield, same courage." When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had intensified. Judge Ellington called for Maria Redstone to testify directly about Ravencrest's practices. Despite visible nervousness, Maria spoke clearly about her 12 years in the breeding program. Initially, I believed we were preserving Mustang genetics, she explained. But over time, the focus shifted to eliminating what Ms. Blackwood called undesirable wild traits, while maintaining the appearance and hardiness of Mustangs. And what happened to foals that exhibited these undesirable traits? Reed asked. Maria's voice wavered but held firm. They were designated for elimination. I was told they were humanely euthanized or placed in sanctuaries. I later discovered many were simply abandoned in remote areas to die. Ravencrest's attorney cross-examined, aggressively questioning Maria's credibility and motives, but the damage was done. Judge Ellington's expression had darkened noticeably during her testimony. The proceedings continued with Inspector Montgomery presenting preliminary findings from the state investigation, followed by testimony from a BLM official regarding the adoption violations. By late afternoon, both sides had presented their core arguments. Judge Ellington peered over her reading glasses at the assembled parties. This case presents complex questions about ownership, legal compliance, and animal welfare that cannot be adequately resolved in a single emergency hearing. Therefore, I'm extending the injunction preventing removal of the 5 Mustang foals for 30 days, during which time the state investigation and BLM audit will continue. She fixed Caroline Blackwood with a stern gaze. Furthermore, I'm ordering a complete inspection of Ravencrest Equestrian's breeding facilities by state and federal authorities within 72 hours. Blackwood's composed facade cracked momentarily, a flash of alarm crossing her features before she controlled it. Your Honor, her attorney protested, such an inspection would interfere with proprietary research, which may have been conducted in violation of federal regulations. Judge Ellington interrupted. The inspection will proceed. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality, and Michael felt a surge of cautious relief. They hadn't won permanently, but they'd gained critical time and a significant tactical advantage. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around both parties. Blackwood offered only a terse no comment before being whisked away in her luxury car, while Reed carefully summarized the judge's decision as an important step toward protecting both these specific foals and the integrity of wild horse conservation efforts. As they drove back to Lone Canyon, the magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. They'd stood against a powerful corporation with seemingly limitless resources and forced the legal system to take notice. The inspection is the key, Dr. Reyes commented from the back seat. If the authorities find evidence of other culling practices at Ravencrest's facilities, they will, Maria interjected confidently. Caroline keeps meticulous records. She's too proud of her methodology to destroy documentation even when it might incriminate her. Michael gazed out the window at the passing landscape, thinking about how much had changed in the short time since he'd found the foals. He'd returned to Texas a broken man, haunted by war, and disconnected from his past. Now he found himself at the center of a battle that had awakened something he thought long dead hope. By the time they reached Connor Ranch, dusk was settling over the land, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and gold. Michael headed straight for the barn, eager to check on the foals. The veterinary student Reed had enlisted a young woman named Jessie greeted him with positive reports. They've been amazing, she enthused. The done one Dune right, he's particularly improved. Took his formula like a champion and even managed a little trot around the stall. Michael thanked her for keeping watch, then spent time with each foal, reassuring himself they were indeed thriving. Silver approached immediately, pressing his muzzle against Michael's chest in greeting. Flame circled excitedly while Star nuzzled his hand for treats. Jet maintained his cautious distance, but watched with alert interest, and Dune, true to Jessie's report, stood steadily on legs that no longer trembled. We bought you some more time, Michael told him softly, and maybe struck a real blow against Ravencrest. Frank appeared in the barn doorway, a rare smile crinkling his weathered face. Sheriff Foster just called, said the inspection team is already assembling. They'll hit Ravencrest's main facility at dawn tomorrow. That's faster than I expected, Michael replied, surprised. Judge must have lit a fire under them. Frank nodded. Or maybe folks are just tired of Ravencrest running roughshod over regulations. They shared a quiet moment of satisfaction before Frank continued. There's something else you should see. Outside, Michael found several ranch trucks parked in his front yard. At least a dozen local ranchers, some he recognized from town, and others he'd never met, were unloading lumber tools and supplies. "What's going on?" Michael asked, confused. Dave Miller from the feed store stepped forward. "Figured your barn could use some reinforcing if it's going to house 5 growing Mustangs. Thought we'd help with the repairs." Michael was momentarily speechless. His father had kept mostly to himself, and Michael had assumed the isolation was mutual. Yet here were neighbors, an entire community, volunteering their labor and materials. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Don't need to say anything," Dave replied with a shrug. "Just point us where to start." The next few hours blurred into a flurry of activity as the impromptu work crew tackled the most critical repairs. They reinforced stall dividers, patched roof leaks, replaced rotted floorboards, and installed new water troughs. Women from the community arrived with food-hardy casseroles, fresh bread, and homemade pies laid out on folding tables in the yard. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the continuing work. Michael moved between groups, offering thanks and learning names, feeling a growing connection to this place and these people that he hadn't experienced since childhood. The ranch, so long a symbol of his father's solitary nature and their strained relationship, was transforming into something new, a gathering place, a symbol of community resistance against corporate overreach. Frank found him taking a rare break, sitting on the porch steps with a plate of food. "Something my grandfather used to say," the elderly rancher mused. "When you stand for what's right, you never stand alone." Michael nodded, surveying the bustling activity. "I never expected this. People around here have lost a lot to Ravencrest over the years. Land, water rights, livelihoods. You've given them something to rally around, a chance to push back." Near midnight, the work slowed as ranchers began departing, promising to return the next day to continue repairs. Michael thanked each one personally, still somewhat overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Dr. Reyes, who had been helping coordinate the barn improvements, joined him as the last truck pulled away. "You started something important here, Michael. Something bigger than just these 5 foals." "I didn't start anything," he demurred. "I just found some abandoned Mustangs and chose to fight for them when most would have walked away," she countered. "That matters." They parted with the agreement to meet early the next morning to check on the foals and await news from the inspection. Michael, exhausted but too wired to sleep, made one final visit to the barn. The 5 Mustangs were settled for the night, but Silver raised his head as Michael entered, nickering softly in recognition. The silver-gray colt had grown noticeably in the short time since his rescue, his coat developing a lustrous sheen that caught the lantern light. "Big day tomorrow," Michael told him quietly, stroking his neck. "Could change everything." Silver's intelligent eyes seemed to understand his ears, flicking forward attentively. The white star marking on his forehead, what Maria had called the resistance trait, stood out clearly against his silvery coat, a symbol of the wildness Ravencrest had tried to breed out of his bloodline. Michael sat with the foals until his eyes grew heavy, lulled by their rhythmic breathing and the newfound sense of purpose that had settled over him. When he finally returned to the house, he slept deeply for the first time since coming home from war. Morning arrived with the shrill ring of the telephone. Michael fumbled for the receiver, still half asleep. "Connor," Reed's voice came through, vibrating with the urgency. "The inspection team entered Ravencrest's main facility 2 hours ago. You need to turn on your TV." Michael scrambled for the remote, switching on the small television in the living room. The local news was broadcasting live from outside Ravencrest Equestrian's headquarters, where a flurry of official vehicles were parked. A reporter stood in the foreground, speaking urgently into her microphone. "What authorities are calling disturbing evidence of systematic animal cruelty. Sources within the inspection team report finding detailed records of Mustang foals designated for disposal due to undesirable genetic traits." Even more shocking, investigators discovered 12 Mustang foals currently in isolation, apparently slated for similar abandonment. The camera panned to show animal control officers leading young horses into specialized trailers, while stern-faced officials in uniform carried boxes of documents from the building. State and federal authorities have temporarily suspended Ravencrest's operations pending a full investigation. Caroline Blackwood was unavailable for comment, but a company spokesperson has denied all allegations, calling this a grave misunderstanding that will be rectified. Michael sank into a chair, stunned by the rapid developments. The phone rang again. Reyes, this time her voice vibrating with excitement. Are you watching this? They found everything Maria said they would. Documentation of the culling program going back years, and those foals they rescued all with the same marking as Silver, the resistance trait. Before Michael could fully process the implications, a vehicle pulled up outside. Through the window, he saw Sheriff Foster stepping out of his patrol car, followed by Inspector Montgomery. He met them at the door, ushering them into the kitchen, where the TV still blared updates about the raid. "Quite a morning," the sheriff commented, accepting the coffee Michael hastily offered. "Never thought I'd see the day Ravencrest got taken down a peg." Inspector Montgomery was more measured. "This is just the beginning of what will likely be a lengthy investigation and legal process, but I wanted to update you personally. The evidence recovered strongly corroborates everything your witnesses claimed about the abandoned foals." "What about the foals they found there?" Michael asked. "The ones in isolation." "Being transported to a state facility for evaluation and care," she replied. "All appear to be from the same breeding line as yours, all bearing similar markings. Preliminary genetic testing suggests they're related to your five." The implications were staggering. Ravencrest had been systematically eliminating any Mustang offspring that displayed the so-called resistance trait, the very characteristic that defined wild horses' nature. "And the legal status of our five?" Michael inquired cautiously. Inspector Montgomery smiled for the first time. "Given the evidence of Ravencrest's regulatory violations and the documented culling program, the state's position is that these animals were abandoned. Legally speaking, they're now yours, Mr. Connor. Unless you've changed your mind about keeping them," the sheriff added gruffly. Michael shook his head firmly. "They belong here." After the officials departed, promising to keep him informed as the investigation progressed, Michael walked to the barn in a daze. The morning sun streamed through the newly repaired roof, illuminating the stalls where five his Mustang foals greeted him with familiar nickering. Silver pranced forward, tossing his silver mane as if sensing the momentous news. Flame pawed impatiently at the straw, eager for her morning feed. Star gazed at him with her gentle eyes, while Jet observed cautiously from a safe distance, and Dune, standing firmly on legs that grew stronger each day, let out a soft whinny that sounded remarkably like triumph. Frank arrived shortly after having heard the news on his truck radio. He found Michael sitting on a hay bale surrounded by the five Mustangs, who now moved freely around the barn's center area. "Quite a turn of events," the elderly rancher observed. "Hard to believe it's only been 10 days since I found them," Michael replied, watching Silver confidently lead the others in a circuit around the barn. 10 days, that changed everything." Frank nodded. "For them, for Ravencrest, for you." Michael couldn't argue with that assessment. The broken soldier who had returned to this ranch with no purpose beyond surviving another day had found something worth fighting for, and in the process perhaps found himself again. Outside, the sound of vehicles approaching signaled the return of yesterday's community work crew, ready to continue their repairs and improvements. But there were more this time, additional trucks, more volunteers, each bringing materials and skills to offer. Frank smiled at Michael's expression of surprise. News travels fast. Everyone wants to be part of the Mustang 5 story now. As they stepped outside to greet the volunteers, Dr. Regis pulled up in her truck, followed by the reporter who had covered the initial confrontation. The growing crowd gathered around Michael, eager for updates and a glimpse of the famous foals. Standing on his porch, looking out at the community that had rallied around his cause and the five young Mustangs that had catalyzed it all, Michael Connor felt something unfamiliar but unmistakable unfurl in his chest. Hope not just for the future of these horses, but for his own. 3 months later, the summer heat had given way to the gentler warmth of early autumn, painting the surrounding hills in subtle golds and ambers. Connor Ranch had transformed almost beyond recognition. The sagging fences stood tall and sturdy now, the barn roof completely restored. The paddocks expanded with room for growing foals. Fresh paint brightened the weathered buildings, and new signs marked the entrance: Connor Ranch Mustang Sanctuary. Michael stood on the porch nursing a mug of coffee as he watched the morning activities unfold. In the largest paddock, Silver led the other four through their daily exercises, his silver coat gleaming in the morning light. At 3 months old, the once fragile foals had blossomed into strong young Mustangs, their personalities fully emerged. Flame raced in exuberant circles, always testing boundaries, her chestnut coat like burnished copper in the sun. Star grazed peacefully, her gentle nature making her a favorite with visiting children. Jet had overcome his initial wariness to become observant and calculating, often finding ways to open latches or reach treats thought to be secured. And Dune, once on death's door, now matched the others in strength and stamina, his quiet resilience and inspiration to everyone who heard his story. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew Michael's attention. Dr. Reyes's familiar white pickup turned into the driveway, followed by a small bus with Pioneer Elementary School emblazoned on its side. Today marked the official opening of the ranch's educational program, an initiative Michael had developed with help from local teachers and Mustang conservation experts. "Ready for your first class?" Dr. Reyes asked, joining him on the porch. "As ready as I'll get," Michael replied with a smile, straightening the new shirt she'd insisted he wear for the occasion. The past 3 months had brought changes beyond just the physical restoration of the ranch. The investigation into Ravencrest Equestrian had expanded to include federal agencies examining violations of wildlife protection laws, animal welfare statutes, and patent regulations. Carolyn Blackwood herself now faced criminal charges for the systemic abandonment of foals deemed unfit for her breeding program. More importantly, the 12 additional foals found during the raid had been temporarily placed with responsible sanctuaries, while the legal proceedings continued. All exhibited the same resistance trait, marking that silver carried the white star pattern that indicated an unwillingness to be fully domesticated. The school bus doors opened and 20 excited third graders spilled out, shepherded by their teacher and 2 parent volunteers. Michael took a deep breath and stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to Connor Ranch Mustang Sanctuary," he said, finding his voice steadier than expected. "Today you're going to meet 5 very special horses and learn about America's wild Mustangs." The children gathered around him wide-eyed and eager as he led them toward the paddock where the 5 Mustangs watched with curious interest. Silver, as always, approached first, standing regally at the fence as the children gasped and pointed. "This is Silver," Michael explained, resting a hand on the silver gray's neck. "He was the leader from the very beginning, even when they were all in trouble. He has what's called the resistance trait, this white star marking on his forehead. It means he carries the true spirit of wild Mustangs." A small girl raised her hand tentatively. "Did bad people really leave them to die?" Michael exchanged a glance with the teacher, carefully considering his response. They were abandoned by people who didn't understand their value. Sometimes people only see worth in things they can control. And these Mustangs couldn't be fully controlled. "Like the story of the wild horse that wouldn't be tamed," one boy interjected. "Our teacher read us that before we came." Michael smiled. "Exactly like that. These 5 youngsters carry something special in them, the memory of freedom that all Mustangs share. That's what makes them important." As he continued the tour, explaining how the foals had been rescued and nursed back to health, Michael noticed Frank Yellowhawk arriving. The elderly rancher had become a regular presence at the sanctuary, sharing traditional knowledge about horses and helping develop the educational materials that connected Mustangs to the region's cultural heritage. "Mr. Yellowhawk is going to tell you some stories about what horses meant to the original people of this land," Michael explained, leading the children to where Frank had set up beneath a large oak tree. While Frank captivated the students with tales of how horses transformed native cultures, Michael stepped aside with Dr. Reyes to check on recent developments. "The genetic testing came back," she informed him quietly. "All 17 foals are 5+, the 12 from Ravencrest facility share distinctive markers that trace back to one of the original wild herds from the prior mountains. It's one of the oldest and purest Mustang bloodlines in America, which explains Ravencrest's interest." Michael nodded. "And why these particular foals were so important to their program, and why they were discarded when they showed the resistance trait." She agreed. Their entire business model depended on creating Mustangs that looked wild, but behaved like domesticated horses. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek silver sedan. Timothy Reed emerged looking more relaxed than during the height of the legal battle, though his suit remained impeccably pressed. "Good news," the attorney announced, approaching them. "The federal court has officially invalidated Ravencrest patents on Mustang genetic sequences. The ruling states unequivocally that naturally occurring genetic material from federally protected wild horses cannot be privately owned." Michael exhaled slowly, absorbing the significance. So no corporation can patent Mustang genetics again, not unless they want to face the precedent we've established. Reed confirmed. It's a landmark ruling for wildlife conservation across the board. As the lawyer shared additional details about the ongoing cases against Raven Crest, Michael's attention drifted to the paddock, where Silver stood watching him intently, as if understanding the importance of this conversation to his kind. The school visit concluded with the children presenting Michael with hand-drawn pictures of the Mustangs and a banner reading, "Thank you for saving the Mustang 5." And their excitement and genuine concern for the horse's welfare reinforced Michael's belief in the sanctuary's mission, not just to care for these specific animals, but to educate the next generation about wild horse conservation. After the bus departed, Michael found himself alone with the 5 Mustangs. He entered the paddock, something he could now do with complete confidence. They approached him in their characteristic ways, flame bouncing energetically. Star gently nuzzling his hand, Jet maintaining a thoughtful distance, Dune standing steady and calm, and Silver always Silver meeting him eye to eye in that uncanny way that suggested communication beyond words. "We did it," Michael told them, stroking Silver's forehead, where the white star seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. "Ravencrest can't hurt anymore like you, and people are starting to understand why you matter." A distant rumble of thunder prompted him to glance at the horizon where storm clouds gathered over the western hills. The Mustangs noticed it too, their ears pricking forward, nostrils flaring to catch the changing scent of the air. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Michael opened the gate to the larger pasture that stretched toward the hills. With a soft whistle, a signal he'd developed that meant freedom, not control, he indicated they could run if they wished. Silver understood immediately. With a toss of his silver mane, he led the others through the gate, breaking into a gallop as they reached the open space. Michael watched them run, 5 young Mustangs moving in perfect synchrony across the landscape their ancestors had roamed for centuries. The rain intensified, but Michael remained savoring the sight of their unbridled movement. There was a wild beauty in how they embraced the storm, racing the wind with a joy that no amount of selective breeding could ever eliminate from their spirits. Dr. Rarhays joined him, holding an umbrella that she extended to share. "They're magnificent," she said softly. "They're free," Michael replied. "Even here with fences in the distance, they know who they are." As lightning flashed across the darkening sky, illuminating the running Mustangs in brief, brilliant moments, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. 10 weeks ago, he'd been a broken man with no purpose, and they had been 5 abandoned foals left to die because they carried the untamable spirit of their wild ancestors. Now the ranch had become a sanctuary not just for these 5, but potentially for others that would follow. The legal precedent established through their case had created protection for Mustang genetics that extended far beyond these specific horses. And Michael himself had found healing in the purpose that now defined his days. "You know," Dr. Reyes said thoughtfully, "when I first met you, you told me you weren't equipped to care for Mustang foals." Michael smiled, remembering that day. "I wasn't. But you were exactly what they needed," she countered, "someone who understood what it meant to be wounded but unwilling to surrender." The rain began to ease, and in the distance, the 5 Mustangs slowed their run, gathering beneath a stand of trees on the hillside. Even from this distance, Michael could distinguish Silver's silver coat, the colt standing slightly apart, head raised proudly as he surveyed his domain. Later that evening, after the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and cool, Michael sat on the porch with Frank. The elderly rancher had brought his guitar, again playing quiet melodies while they talked about the sanctuary's future plans. "My grandfather would be pleased," Frank commented, nodding toward the paddock where the Mustangs had returned for their evening feed. "He always said the spirit of the land lives in these horses, that as long as they run free, something essential remains unbroken." "I'm beginning to understand what he meant," Michael replied. The sanctuary had already received inquiries about taking in more rescued Mustangs, particularly those with the resistance trait that made them unsuitable for traditional adoption programs. Plans were underway to expand the facilities, funded in part by a grant from a national conservation organization that had taken interest in their story. Maria Redstone had joined the sanctuary's advisory board, her expertise in Mustang behavior proving invaluable as they developed programs. Even Sheriff Foster had become a supporter, bringing his horse-loving daughter to volunteer on weekends. As darkness settled over the ranch, Michael made his final check on the Mustangs. They were settled in their stall, a far cry from the makeshift shelter he'd first created. Silver nickered softly as Michael approached the bond between them, having deepened into something that transcended typical human-animal relationships. Get some rest, Michael told him quietly. Tomorrow's another busy day. Standing in the doorway of the barn, looking back at the 5 young lives that had so unexpectedly changed his own, Michael Connor felt the weight of his past lighten just a little more. The nightmares that had haunted him since Afghanistan had gradually diminished, replaced by dreams of running horses in open spaces. These 5 newborn Mustangs, abandoned to die because they carried the untamable essence of their wild heritage, had not only survived against impossible odds, they had thrived, becoming symbols of resistance and resilience that resonated far beyond the boundaries of Connor Ranch. And in saving them, Michael had discovered the truth that had eluded him since returning from war. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage involve not fighting against enemies, but standing for something irreplaceable and pure. The right of wild spirits to remain wild, the possibility that broken things can heal, and the power of unexpected beginnings to change everything that follows. As he walked back to the house under a sky brilliant with stars, Michael heard Silver's clear whinny behind him. Not a call of distress or need, but a sound of strength and certainty, a reminder that what had once been abandoned had found its rightful place, standing proud beneath the endless Texas scoured mud. 6 months after the rescue, Michael stood at the fence of the largest pasture, watching as Silver and the others grazed peacefully in the winter sunshine. The young Mustangs had grown remarkably, their bodies strong and sleek, their personalities fully developed. Though they remained close as a herd, each had established their own identity and place within the group. Sarah, as he now called her, joined him at the fence, slipping her hand into his, with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the months of working side by side. The new group arrives tomorrow, she reminded him, referring to the 3 Mustang yearlings being transferred from an overcrowded rescue facility in Nevada. Like the original 5, they bore the white star marking of the resistance trait. Silver will have them sorted out within a day, Michael replied with a smile. The silver-gray Mustang had maintained his role as leader, displaying an uncanny ability to integrate new arrivals into the herd with minimal conflict. The sanctuary had expanded more rapidly than either of them had anticipated. Word had spread through the network of wild horse advocates, and Connor Ranch had become known as a haven for Mustangs that displayed the resistance trait, those deemed unsuitable for adoption by conventional standards. What had started with 5 abandoned foals had grown into a specialized facility housing 23 Mustangs of various ages, all sharing the distinctive marking that Ravencrest had tried to eliminate from their breeding program. The legal battle with Ravencrest had concluded with a resounding victory for wild horse conservation. Carolyn Blackwood had eventually pleaded guilty to multiple violations of animal welfare laws, receiving a suspended sentence and substantial fines. More significantly, the company's attempt to patent naturally occurring genetic sequences in wild horses had been definitively rejected by the courts, establishing a precedent that protected all wild species from similar corporate attempts at genetic ownership. I got a call from the Bureau of Land Management today, Sarah said, leaning her head against Michael's shoulder. They want to include our sanctuary in their pilot program for Mustang heritage preservation. It would mean access to additional funding and support. That's good news, Michael nodded. We'll need it if we keep expanding at this rate. The transformation of Connor Ranch from a rundown property Michael had intended to sell to a thriving sanctuary had been remarkable. The community that had rallied around the Mustang 5 had continued to support the sanctuary's development, with local ranchers regularly volunteering their time and skills for construction projects and maintenance. School groups visited weekly for educational programs, and university researchers had begun studying the behaviors of Mustangs, with the resistance trait documenting the unique characteristics that made them both challenging to domesticate and essential to preserve. Dad would never believe what this place has become, Michael mused, surveying the renovated barns and new facilities that had replaced the dilapidated structures he'd inherited. I think he would, Sarah countered. Frank says your father always had a soft spot for wild things. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. Michael considered this. His relationship with his late father remained complicated in his memory, but over the months, as neighbors and townsfolk shared stories about James Connor, A different picture had emerged, one of a quiet man who had fought his own battles against the encroachment of corporations like Ravencrest, who had silently supported conservation efforts, and who had, in his own reserved way, valued the wild spirit of the land he'd stewarded. A flash of movement caught Michael's eye as Silver suddenly raised his head, ears pricked toward the distant hills. The other Mustangs immediately responded to his alert posture, gathering closer as they too focused on something beyond human perception. Then Michael heard it, the faint sound of hoofbeats growing steadily louder. Over the ridge appeared a sight that stole his breath, a band of wild Mustangs, at least 15 strong, led by a magnificent black stallion. They paused at the crest, regarding the sanctuary with what seemed like deliberate assessment. "I don't believe it," Sarah whispered. "That's part of the Lone Canyon herd. They're rarely seen this close to settled areas." Silver trotted to the far fence, positioning himself directly across from the wild band. He issued a clear, resonant whinny that carried across the distance, not a challenge, but a greeting. The black stallion responded in kind, pawing the ground once before leading his band in a sweeping circle along the ridgeline, their manes and tails flowing like banners in the winter wind. The display lasted several breathtaking minutes, wild Mustangs running free, seemingly for the pure joy of movement, while Silver and the sanctuary herd watched from their enclosure, alert and responsive, as if participating in a ritual of recognition. "It's like they know," Sarah said softly, "like they're acknowledging what you've created here." As the wild band finally disappeared back over the ridge, Silver remained at the fence for a long moment before returning to the others. Michael couldn't help but notice how the young Mustang moved with the same fluid grace and innate dignity as the wild stallion, despite having been born in captivity and nearly lost to Ravencrest's culling program. "The resistance trait," Michael murmured. "It really is something special, isn't it? No matter how they're bred, that wild spirit finds a way to express itself." Sarah nodded. "It's what makes them who they are, what makes them valuable beyond any price tag Ravencrest could put on them." As they walked back toward the house, Michael glanced over his shoulder for one last look at Silver. The young Mustang stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge where the wild band had vanished. His silver coat burnished to platinum by the setting sun, the white star on his forehead gleaming like a beacon. In that moment, Michael understood with complete clarity what they had fought to preserve, not just 5 abandoned foals, but something essential that lived within them, a spark of wildness that could never truly be tamed or owned. The same spark that had helped him find his way back from the darkness of war, that had connected him to this land and these people, that had given him purpose and healing when he'd needed it most. Frank had been right all along. Some things could never be possessed, only respected, honored, and if you were fortunate, briefly partnered with on life's journey. As winter dusk settled over Connor Ranch Mustang Sanctuary, Silver tossed his head and cantered back to join his herd, free within the necessary boundaries of their protected home, carrying within them the untamable spirit that no human hand could ever fully harness, no corporate breeding program could ever eliminate, and no heart could encounter without being forever changed. And for Michael Connor, once broken by war and now made whole by an unexpected battle for something pure and wild, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the Texas hills, painting the landscape in vibrant blues, reds, and yellows. The anniversary of the day Michael had found the abandoned foals approached, and preparations were underway for a celebration that would also serve as a fundraiser for the sanctuary's expansion. In the years since their rescue, the Mustang 5 had matured remarkably. Silver, now a striking yearling with his silver coat gleaming in the sunshine, had maintained his role as the heart of the sanctuary. Visitors frequently commented on his unusual intelligence and the way he seemed to communicate with both humans and other horses. The white star marking on his forehead had grown more prominent with age, standing out clearly against his silver coat like a badge of honor. Flame had developed into a spirited young filly whose energy seemed inexhaustible. Her chestnut coat shone like polished copper, and she took particular delight in leading the younger Mustangs in playful chases around the pastures. Star remained gentle and sweet-natured, often the first to approach visitors at the fence, especially children. Jet had overcome his initial wariness to become confident and observant, though he maintained a thoughtful reserve that made earning his trust feel like a special achievement. And Dune, once so close to death, now displayed a quiet strength and endurance that made him a favorite for longer trail walks around the sanctuary's boundaries. The transformation in the Mustangs was matched by the changes in Michael himself. The haunted veteran who had returned to his father's ranch with no purpose beyond selling it had become the passionate director of a sanctuary that was gaining national recognition for its work. The nightmares that had plagued him since Afghanistan had largely receded, replaced by restful sleep and dreams of open spaces. His relationship with Sarah had deepened into something neither had expected, but both treasured a partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect that had gradually blossomed into love. On the morning of the anniversary, Michael rose early and walked to the main pasture where the original 5 Mustangs now lived together with several newer rescues. Silver spotted him immediately trotting over to the fence with his characteristic purposeful stride. The others followed at a more leisurely pace, forming a semicircle behind their leader. "1 year," Michael said quietly, reaching out to stroke Silver's forehead, where the white star gleamed in the morning light. "Hard to believe everything that's happened since I found you guys in that ravine." Silver pressed his muzzle against Michael's palm, his dark eyes holding that same intelligent gaze that had struck Michael from their first encounter. There was something almost ceremonial about the moment, a quiet acknowledgement between man and horse of the journey they had shared. The sound of an approaching vehicle broke the stillness. Sarah's truck appeared on the drive, followed by Frank's familiar blue pickup. As they parked and joined Michael at the fence, the three stood in companionable silence, watching the Mustangs that had changed all their lives. "The resistance trait," Frank said, finally nodding towards Silver's star marking. "My grandfather would say, it's not just about being difficult to tame. It's about remembering who you truly are no matter what forces try to reshape you." Michael nodded in understanding the deeper meaning in the old man's words. "Remembering who you are," he repeated softly. "I think they helped me do that too." Sarah slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. "They did the same for all of us. Reminded us what's worth fighting for." As the day progressed, visitors began arriving for the anniversary celebration. Local families who had supported the sanctuary from the beginning, reporters covering the event, representatives from conservation organizations, and even a few government officials interested in the sanctuary's approach to Mustang preservation. The atmosphere was festive with educational displays, live music, and guided tours of the expanded facilities. The highlight of the day was scheduled for late afternoon, the release of the Mustang 5 into the sanctuary's largest pasture, a sprawling 50-acre expanse that bordered public lands where wild Mustang herds occasionally roamed. This pasture represented the next phase in the sanctuary's mission, creating protected spaces where Mustangs with the resistance trait could live as naturally as possible while remaining under the sanctuary's care. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting long golden shadows across the land, a crowd gathered at the fence of the holding corral. Michael stood at the gate with Sarah and Frank beside him. The 5 Mustangs waited inside, seemingly aware that something significant was about to happen. "1 year ago today," Michael addressed the assembled guests. "These 5 Mustangs were abandoned to die because they carried a trait that made them unsuitable for a corporate breeding program. They were considered defective because they couldn't be fully domesticated because they retain the wild spirit that makes Mustangs what they are." He gestured toward the expanded sanctuary grounds. "Today, that very trait is the reason they're here, the reason this sanctuary exists. What Ravencrest saw as a flaw, we recognize as the essential nature of these remarkable animals. The resistance trait isn't a defect to be bred out. It's a reminder of what wild horses have always been and should always remain, untamable spirits that connect us to something greater than ourselves." With these words, Michael swung the gate open, stepping aside to give the Mustangs a clear path to the larger pasture. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Silver stepped forward, pausing at the threshold as if assessing the expanded territory. He turned his head, looking directly at Michael with those knowing eyes, and nickered softly, a sound that several onlookers later described as almost like "thank you." Then with a toss of his silver mane, he broke into a run, charging into the open pasture with a display of pure joy and freedom. The others followed, Flame racing exuberantly, Star moving with elegant grace, Jet with measured calculation, and Dune with steady determination. Together they traversed the expansive space, their movements synchronized as if performing a dance choreographed by ancient instincts. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, many wiping away tears at the emotional sight. Cameras clicked and video rolled, capturing the moment for news stories that would further spread the sanctuary's message. As Michael watched the Mustangs running free in the golden light of the setting sun, he felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with finding 5 abandoned foals had come full circle. What had started as an act of basic compassion had grown into a mission that had not only saved these animals, but had created a model for preserving the wild spirit they represented. "They're beautiful," Sarah said beside him, her voice thick with emotion. "They're free," Michael replied, echoing the words he'd spoken months before. "As free as they can be in this world." Frank nodded sagely. "And they've freed something in all of us, too." As darkness began to fall, the celebration wound down with guests departing, full of enthusiasm for the sanctuary's work. Eventually, only Michael, Sarah, and Frank remained watching as the 5 Mustangs gradually settled in their new territory, grazing peacefully under the emerging stars. "What's next?" Sarah asked, leaning against Michael's shoulder. "More rescues," he replied without hesitation. "More education, more work to protect wild herds so that someday places like this won't be necessary." "A worthy dream," Frank commented, "and one I think will happen thanks to what started here." Later that night, after everyone had gone and the sanctuary lay quiet under the vast Texas sky, Michael made one final visit to the new pasture. The 5 Mustangs had gathered near the fence as if waiting for him. Silver stood slightly apart, his silver coat gleaming like liquid moonlight, the white star on his forehead, a beacon in the darkness. "Thank you," Michael said simply, knowing no other words could capture what these animals had given him: purpose, healing, community, love, and a future he could never have imagined a year ago. Silver approached the fence, reaching his muzzle over to touch Michael's outstretched hand. Then, with a soft whinny that seemed to carry both acknowledgement and promise, he turned and trotted back to the others. Together, the 5 Mustangs moved deeper into their new territory, their outlines gradually fading into the moonlit landscape until only the occasional flash of Silver's coat revealed their presence. Michael watched until they disappeared from view, knowing they would return when they chose to on their own terms, as befitted creatures who carried the resistance trait, whose spirits could be honored but never owned. As he walked back toward the house where Sarah waited, Michael felt the weight of his past fall away completely. The memories of war would always be part of him, but they no longer defined him. He had found a new identity in this unexpected mission, a new purpose in protecting these untamable spirits. The 5 abandoned Mustangs had saved him as surely as he had saved them. And in that mutual rescue, something profound had been preserved, not just 5 lives, but a legacy of wildness that would continue long after all of them were gone, an enduring reminder that some things in this world should remain forever free. The setting sun paints the Texas hills in amber and gold, casting long shadows across what was once a broken-down ranch. In the distance, 5 Mustangs run freely, their movements fluid and wild, despite all attempts to breathe that spirit out of them. What is it about untamable things that both frightens and calls to us? Perhaps it's the mirror they hold to our own spirits, the parts of ourselves that resist being controlled, categorized, or diminished. Michael Connor came home from war, a shattered man searching for meaning in a world that no longer made sense. He found it in the most unexpected place. 5 abandoned foals carrying a trait deemed defective simply because it couldn't be dominated. In saving them, he saved himself. In fighting for their right to remain wild, he rediscovered his own untamable spirit. The courage to stand against powerful forces, the strength to rebuild what was broken, the capacity to love what others had discarded. Some things in this world were never meant to be owned. The wild heart of a Mustang, the dignity of a wounded soul finding purpose, the freedom that lives in all of us if we only have the courage to claim it. As night falls on the sanctuary, Silver raises his head toward the distant mountains where his ancestors once ran unfettered. The white star on his forehead catches the last light of day, a small, defiant reminder that no matter how hard we try, some spirits will always remain gloriously, perfectly free. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be.